afternoon. It's Thursday, January 7th. I'm Ariel O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. In Egypt today, shots were fired at a group of Israeli Arab tourists as they boarded a bus outside the Three Pyramids Hotel in Giza. No one was hurt in the attack, but some damage was caused to the hotel. It's not yet clear the number of gunmen involved in the attack. Reports out of Egypt say 2 masked gunmen riding a motorcycle shot at the tourists, and other reports spoke of between 15 and 20 attackers. Arab Knesset member Ahmed Tibi said on his Facebook page that 45 tourists from al-Faham were boarding the bus when the attack occurred. Egyptian security officials said 2 of the perpetrators were arrested, and police are continuing to search for the others involved. The manhunt of Israel's Arab terrorist Nashat Milhem continues in the northern part of the country amid reports that he may have fled into the West Bank. Police today requested that the remand of Milhem's father, who is suspected of being an accomplice, be extended by an additional 10 days. Another one of the terrorist's relatives is expected to be released from custody today. At the same time, the family of taxi driver Amin Shaban, the third person allegedly murdered by Milhem, is today demanding that authorities hand over footage from the cab's onboard camera that may have revealed information related to the killing of Shaban. He was found murdered in North Tel Aviv shortly after the deadly shooting at the Simta pub on Dizengoff Street. A 4-man Hamas terror cell from Hebron and East Jerusalem allegedly plotted to murder an Israeli settler and use his body as a bargaining chip to facilitate the release of Palestinian terrorists incarcerated in Israel. The 4 were recently arrested in raids conducted by Israeli security forces. Details released for publication by the Shin Bet security agency today said cell members had planned to kill a settler from Beit Chagai, near Hebron, and hide his body in a well. They were in advanced planning stages when they were caught. Hundreds gathered before dawn this morning at Jerusalem's Mount Herzl Military Cemetery to take part in the funeral of 23-year-old IDF company commander Captain Yishai Rosales, who was killed Tuesday afternoon during a training accident in the Tselim Army base in the south. Rosales was hit after a mortar shell strayed from its target and exploded near a group of soldiers. Rosales and a fellow soldier were hit by flying shrapnel, and the officer was pronounced dead at the site, and the second soldier was lightly injured. The family of Rosales, who immigrated to Israel from Mexico several years ago, appealed to the public to attend the burial because most of his relatives live abroad. In a touching show of support, dozens of mourners, many who did not know the fallen soldier, arrived across the country. A major reshuffling of positions in the police. Just weeks after taking up post, Police Chief Ronnie El-Sheikh announced a string of appointments with 2 senior positions being filled by people that served in the Shin Bet security service, where he was a deputy. Southern District Commander Yoram Halevi was appointed to take over as Jerusalem District Commander, replacing Moshe Edrei, who will become Tel Aviv Commander. New commander of the Coastal District was named as Amos Yaakov, and Alon Asur will head the Northern District. B from the Shin Bet will head the Police Logistics Support Department. The Judea and Samaria Command will also have operations as well, and they received a new commander in El-Shak's reshuffle. The Prime Minister's office has accused former U.S. envoy Martin Indyk of fabricating a conversation he claimed took place during the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's funeral in 1995.
Netanyahu sat next to me, and I remember Netanyahu saying to me, look at this. He's a hero now. But if he had not been assassinated, I would have beaten him in the elections, and then he would have gone into history as a failed politician. Netanyahu was thinking, well, politically, he was on the ropes before he was assassinated.
Hours after the interview on the PBS Frontline program was aired, the Prime Minister's office issued a statement denying that such a conversation ever took place, and indeed footage of the funeral shows the 2 never sat together at Mount Herzl. Later, Indyk tweeted that the conversation he was referring to occurred on November 5th in 1995 when the 2 sat together at a Knesset ceremony when Rabin's coffin laid in state. Again, the Prime Minister's office issued a sharp denial, saying after the first lying version was proven to be false, Indyk made up a second version, which is also a lie. In recent weeks, Indyk, in a series of interviews, has sharply accused Netanyahu. His latest remarks were made during a special PBS documentary on the relationship between Netanyahu and the White House. In a fiery speech, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas refuted rumors that the Palestinian Authority is on the verge of collapse. Speaking from Bethlehem, He declared the Palestinian leadership will not allow the stalemate with Israel to continue, stressing that the Palestinian Authority is the one of his people's biggest accomplishments, and that only a Palestinian state would replace the PA. Abbas called on an end to the occupation of the West Bank, as well as the removal of all Jewish settlers living in Judea and Samaria. Referring to the recent wave of terror, the PA president once again failed to condemn the violence, only stressing that the Palestinians will not tolerate daily killings of its teenagers by Israeli forces. Meanwhile, the Palestine Liberation Organization's Executive Committee plans to convene next week to decide whether to continue upholding the Oslo Accord agreement with Israel. Well, joining me now in the studio is political analyst and Wall Street Journal contributor Amos Asael of the Hartman Institute. Amos, thanks for having you.
How are you?
This week we saw the manhunt continue for the Israeli Arab terrorists. How do you think this is going to affect the relations between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs?
Well, sadly, this is far from the first time in which Israeli Arabs are implicated in an act of terror. And with all fairness, there have also been more than one case in which Israeli Jews were involved in terror. I therefore don't think that there is a single incident that can fundamentally change the situation. Surely there is between the Jewish and the Muslim communities in Israel some inherent suspicion, and this will do nothing to reduce it, but I don't think it's going to reinvent it either.
Well, the suspicion is that he had fled to the West Bank. And in the West Bank, there have been sort of concerns inside the Knesset, inside the government now, that the Abbas's rule is on the verge of collapse. And the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee is going to have a meeting about this. What do you think?
Well, the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee's meeting is really not a factor in the picture. They are a debating club, so let's set that aside. The question is where the substance of this headline emerged from. It emerged from unnamed sources in the Prime Minister's circle. That too is unimpressive. Having said all this, it's no secret that on the one hand, the PA's political delivery from the viewpoint of its own citizens is problematic, and on the other hand, its security delivery is actually quite effective, as indeed even IDF generals in recent days have conceded.
Haaretz had a front page article today saying that Abbas is actually cracking down on incitement inside of PA media outlets, and also that the security forces are doing well. So how does this dichotomy jive with this idea that they're on the verge of collapse?
It's all about interests. It's all about interests. The PA's inherent interest is to stick together. They understand that breathing down their neck is not Israel but Hamas, and beyond it, other circles and sources of extremism in today's Middle East. And this is their primary concern. All the rest is rhetoric.
Talking about rhetoric, Martin Indyk, the former ambassador to Israel, he had these inflaming statements to say about Netanyahu, which Netanyahu denied. And how do you think this is going to affect the U.S.-Israeli relations?
It's a has-been discussing prehistory and the marginal aspect of it at that. It's really not even a storm in a teacup. I think Martin Indyk's personal agenda with Netanyahu is famous and veteran, nothing new there. And also, he really doesn't matter today, certainly not as much as he did 20 years ago.
We were talking beforehand about China and this collapse in the stock market, and maybe is this some way connected to the test in North Korea about the bomb?
I think that China's imperial future is being tested these days, both economically and geostrategically. Economically, everyone understands that the instability in the financial markets that we're witness to today and in recent weeks reflects what is evidently an end of an era in China's breakneck economic growth in recent decades. They have to somehow make a transition to a freer and more innovative economy, and this is what the financial markets are effectively telling them. At the same time, North Korea, their next-door neighbor and ostensible proxy, is misbehaving from the viewpoint of the Chinese leadership. They are the ones that history demands, first of all and before everyone else, to somehow discipline this misbehaving child. And upcoming weeks and years, only they will be able to tell us whether China is up to this task.
Amos Asael, thanks so much. Always a pleasure to have your insight.
Thank you, Ari.
The wave of terror attacks has created a major dilemma among first responders when it comes to treating its victims and terrorists. Should they reach out and treat them without regard to their identity? Should the terrorists be left to last? When an Arab terrorist plowed into a crowd of people at a bus stop under Jerusalem's Bridge of Strings in December, he seriously injured a toddler. Bystanders subdued and shot the axe-wielding terrorist. When first responders arrived, they were faced with a question: who to treat first?
When there was a child that lost his leg, and at the same time there was a terrorist who was severely wounded, is any question in your head who you're going to go deal with? You have a kid over here that his parents is not going to have a normal life for the rest of his life because he lost his leg, and I should go ahead and try and do everything I can to save this person's life?
Zaka, which stands for Zihui Korbanot Ason, or Disaster Victim Identification, is a first responder on the scene of scores of terrorist attacks to treat victims and also to clean up the remains of the dead, both victims and terrorists. A new regulation of the Israel Medical Association's Ethics Committee, acting on behalf of an appeal by the Physicians for Human Rights, has modified its principles of triage to remove the practice of treating Jewish victims first.
The law of Israel and the ethics code is against discrimination whatsoever. So the powerful, the poor of your city comes first, cannot exist in ethics code, in the Israeli ethics code. And that's why we erase it.
But Zaka says no one should be preaching morality to them.
Zaka has to stand up and say very clearly what we're doing. Say, yes, the victims, does make a difference to us, Jewish, non-Jewish, yes, we're going to treat them equally as a victim. A person that was a murderer, and you can see from the footage of videos that was going on at different times, when a person was shot, one of the terrorists, he still tried to get up and kill a person. So you can imagine if a volunteer of Zaka or any volunteer of an organization will come and try and treat him, and that moment it will stab him, what are you going to say then? Therefore, you have to make some difference.
The IMA holds that sometimes on the scene of mass casualties, it's not always clear who's the victim and who's the perpetrator.
They ought to treat everyone. And if one of them is the offender, then later on the police and then the court will do what they have to do about him, not the physician at the first meeting.
Zaka has announced that from now on, it would treat the bodies of terrorists differently.
How can you put that terrorist, that person, in a bag of Zaka, where people in Israel and around the world recognize the white and blue bag of Zaka as a holy bag, and taking that same bag and putting it a terrorist in it? Therefore, we put them into, a decision was made by Yuda to put them into black body bags. That way it's very clear to the public, to us, who we're dealing with, who the person is. Also, to an extent, we do not put them in the same vehicle, in the same ambulance of Zaka. We take them separately, because we have to show there's a morality, but there's also something over here to show the world there is a difference, and how much we can say we're nice and extend ourselves to be nice, but yes, there's somewhere you have to draw a line.
There's a new hospital in the Gaza Strip. The Indonesia hospital, which took nearly 5 years to build, has today opened its doors, offering some 300,000 Gazans treatment. The two-story medical facility is located on a hilltop outside the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza Strip and contains outpatient clinics, an emergency department, as well as general and orthopedic surgery wings and a special department for abdominal diseases. It is the first new hospital to be built in the Gaza Strip in a decade. The $9 million hospital facility houses 110 beds and was funded by Indonesian individuals. Residents of the capital can hopefully take a fresh breath of relief as the city's sanitation workers ended their nearly 1 week strike. The work stoppage, which began last Thursday, saw mounting piles of garbage along Jerusalem streets, with uncollected trash even blocking off some of the capital's intersections and roads. Workers who officially ended the sanctions several days ago have just this morning started the massive cleanup. The strike was launched following the municipality's decision to fire some 170 employees. The Treasury agreed to transfer additional funds to the city, allowing the workers to stay on the job for at least 1 more year. And here's a story about some ancient garbage. The remains of a 3,400-year-old Canaanite fortress discovered in Nahariya will be incorporated into a residential high-rise. Officials of the Israel's Antiquities Authority believe the citadel was once an administrative center that served Mediterranean mariners. Experts say it had been destroyed at least 4 times by the fire and rebuilt. The site was covered by huge sand dunes that in fact protected the artifacts discovered in the ruins, protecting them like a time bubble. IAA officials said an agreement has been reached with the contractor of the high-rise to ensure the preservation of the site and allow excavation to continue uninterrupted. The officials said that perhaps in the future the dig will be covered by a glass dome to protect the ancient relic and allow the public to visit. Police are cracking down on alleged counterfeiters of the recently issued blue-colored 200 shekel bill. This just weeks after the new bill bearing the portrait of poet Natan Artelman was circulated. This morning, police arrested 5 residents from the north who are suspected of forging the new banknote and using the fake bills to pay at gas stations in the Carmiel area. The 5 suspects are due to appear before court today, where police will seek their remand. Over the past days, there have been warnings of possible fake 200 shekel bills being circulated, and while they look very similar when lifted toward the light, the counterfeit bills have no watermark bearing Artelman's likeness. In local finance, the shekel today put in a mixed performance against all major foreign currencies, and share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were down across the board. Here's a look at the numbers. Looking at the weather, and it's going to be a rainy, wet weekend. The IBA weather team says thunder showers are spreading from the north to the Negev with flood warnings in the eastern part of the country. Mount Hermon is expected to get another layer of snow, and the rest of the country will see high winds. There's also a chance of dust storms in the south, and it's going to be cold. You're looking at the highs and the lows. Well, that brings us to the end of this broadcast of IBA News. I'll be back on Sunday for another daily edition of IBA News. Until then, have a good evening, a great weekend, and shalom from Jerusalem.